Welcome to another deep dive. When we talk about mergers and acquisitions, or M&A, what often comes to mind for many of us?
Yeah, it's often seen as this really high stakes, high risk kind of game, isn't it?
Exactly. You might picture it like, I don't know, a high-stakes poker game where, honestly, despite everyone's best efforts, a lot of players seem to lose more than they win.
Or it feels less like a continuous building effort, maybe more like just a series of one-off projects, really complex, isolated things.
Right, each one a unique challenge. And we constantly hear about those, widely cited failure rates. It leads companies to just lament how difficult M&A truly is.
I feel like you're navigating a minefield sometimes, just trying not to make a big mistake.
Yeah, trying to avoid the next disaster. But here's a truly game-changing idea that kind of flips this whole perspective.
Okay.
What if M&A isn't just about completing those often isolated, complex deals? What if it's about systematically building a real competitive advantage?
An edge. Something rivals can't easily copy.
Precisely. An edge that's incredibly difficult, almost impossible for your rivals to replicate. And that's where M&A truly transforms, from being just a tactical necessity, maybe a hurdle you have to clear.
Into something much more powerful, like a repeatable engine for creating value.
Exactly. A repeatable engine, moving beyond just doing deals to actually building a strategic superpower, one deal at a time, compounding over time.
That's spot on. That's really the core idea we're digging into today. It's about fundamentally shifting how we see M&A, moving away from it being perceived as an art, a series of discrete projects depending on individual genius or, frankly, sometimes just luck.
Right, the deal whisperer kind of thing.
Exactly. Moving from that to seeing it as a rigorous institutional corporate capability, it means applying the same kind of focus, the same consistency, the same professionalism to M&A that you'd apply to any other critical business discipline.
Like product development or marketing or supply chain.
Precisely. Think about how meticulously companies plan those things. This isn't just about dodging bad deals, which obviously is important.
Of course.
But it's more than that. It's about consistently creating significant value and doing it better, more reliably than anyone else in your industry.
So our mission for this deep dive, then, is to unpack 4, maybe often overlooked, institutional capabilities. These seem to be the crucial things that really separate the winning companies, the ones genuinely leveraging M&A for big strategic advantage.
From those that, just kind of collect acquisitions, as you put it, without a really coherent or repeatable strategy behind it.
Yeah, just amassing stuff. So we're going to explore how successful organizations make this shift. We'll start by looking at how they build sharp, focused M&A themes.
Okay.
Then we'll dive into how they actively manage their reputation as an acquirer, almost like managing a brand.
Interesting angle. Reputation matters.
Definitely. Then we'll discuss how they really confirm the strategic vision through rigorous strategic due diligence, going beyond the standard checks.
The strategic piece is key.
And finally, we'll look at how they dynamically evolve their synergy math throughout the whole M&A lifecycle, adapting as they learn more. Not just setting targets once and forgetting them.
Adapting is critical. Things always change post-deal.
So by the end of this deep dive, our goal is for you, the listener, to have a completely different, maybe far more sophisticated view of how M&A can become one of the most powerful strategic levers in a company's toolkit.
Moving beyond just a necessary evil, really.
Yeah, transforming into a source of consistent, repeatable growth that actually compounds over time.
It really is a profound shift in mindset. Many companies, as you touched on, still kind of treat deal-making as these isolated events.
Right. Deal A, then deal B, maybe deal C later.
Exactly. They look at each acquisition as its own unique project, something standing apart from the broader corporate strategy. And this often means there's no real integration of M&A into the long-term vision.
So no shared learning between deals.
Very little often. And certainly no systematic way to build and continuously improve their M&A capability across different business units or over time. And this fragmented approach, it ultimately hinders them from consistently creating real value from their M&A activities.
And what's the consequence of that then? Doesn't it lead to this sort of negative cycle companies get trapped in?
It can, yeah. Instead of actively working on building that core M&A capability, that muscle.
They end up focusing just on the horror stories,
Yeah.
high failure rates everyone talks about.
Precisely. They lament how hard it is, almost like it's this insurmountable obstacle, rather than realizing it's actually a discipline that can be mastered.
A capability that can be honed.
Exactly. Honed to actually win in the marketplace. It's like they get stuck trying to just minimize losses.
Yeah. Instead of proactively figuring out how to maximize the strategic gains.
That's the fundamental shift we're really talking about. The most successful companies, the ones getting this right, approach M&A with the same intensity, the same professional rigor, the same consistent focus they dedicate to their other core disciplines.
You mentioned product development earlier.
Yeah, think about that. How much a company invests in repeatable processes, specialized talent, continuous improvement cycles, R&D budgets for product development.
Or marketing or sales.
Right, or manufacturing. When M&A gets treated with that same level of strategic importance, it transforms. It goes from being merely a tactical necessity, something you do to manage risk or maybe plug a gap.
Into a truly potent strategic capability.
Exactly. And that capability in itself creates a competitive advantage that's incredibly difficult for competitors to copy.
Why is it so hard to copy? Because it's not just one thing.
Precisely, because it's deeply embedded in the very fabric of the organization. It's in its institutional processes, its culture, its collective experience. It's not just about getting lucky on one deal. It's a systemic advantage built over time.
Okay, so to make this transformation really tangible for everyone listening, let's break down those 4 specific, maybe often neglected, institutional capabilities that enable this shift. These are the pillars, you could say, underpinning a truly successful, repeatable M&A engine.
Sounds good. Let's lay them out.
First, we'll explore the importance of engaging in M&A thematically.
Thematically.
Second, we'll delve into managing your reputation as an acquirer.
The reputation piece, right?
Third, confirming the strategic vision with focused strategic due diligence.
Strategic DD. Got it.
And finally, managing synergy targets dynamically across the entire M&A life cycle.
Dynamically, not static.
Exactly. These aren't just, a checklist of best practices. They're core competencies that, when mastered, create genuine strategic advantage.
Right. They work together.
Okay, so let's dive right into that first capability. Engaging in M&A thematically. Now, here's a common problem we often see, right? Many companies operate with pretty broad, sometimes kind of vague strategic directions.
Yeah, like grow in Asia or expand into adjacent markets. Very high level.
Exactly. And when it comes to M&A, their strategy often offers only that kind of general guidance, or a very unspecific idea of how value will actually be created from an acquisition.
So they know what they want, roughly, but not the how or the why-us.
Pretty much. This often leads companies to acquire somewhat indiscriminately, just, purchase growth or get an asset, without a deep, nuanced understanding of how they specifically are truly the best owner of that asset compared to other potential buyers.
The best owner concept, that's critical. Why are you the right buyer?
Think about it. If you're just buying for generic growth, where's the explicit, measurable link to your existing organic investments? How does that acquisition specifically connect to your broader growth initiatives?
Like developing a new product internally that the acquisition complements, or building a sales force for the acquired product.
Exactly. This lack of specificity, this sort of unfocused approach, it inevitably leads to wasted time and resources. You end up chasing loads of targets that don't quite fit, or maybe targets you're not uniquely positioned to integrate well.
And the deal pipeline becomes chaotic.
Totally. A chaotic juggling act of unfocused reactive deals. It's like throwing darts in the dark, hoping something sticks, rather than aiming carefully at a precise target. What's the fallout from that, beyond just wasted effort?
Well, beyond the wasted effort, which is significant, it often means they fail to maximize the value of the asset they actually acquire. They're paying a premium, often a hefty one.
Without a clear plan for how their unique capabilities will unlock extra value that maybe another buyer couldn't.
Exactly. So the solution, what successful companies implement with remarkable discipline, is to proactively develop a pipeline of potential acquisitions centered around maybe 2 or 3 explicit M&A themes.
Explicit themes, not just vague goals.
Right. These themes are way more than just general ideas. They are effectively detailed business plans, plans that strategically use both M&A and organic investments together to achieve a very specific, measurable objective.
So they map out how inorganic growth fits with organic efforts.
Precisely, where M&A truly complements and accelerates what you're already doing or planning internally. And a critical piece within these themes is that they explicitly account for the acquiring organization's unique capabilities.
The best owner part again.
Exactly. It's characteristics that genuinely make it the best owner of a particular business. They force the question, why us? What unique value do we bring to this target that no one else can?
Like specific operational expertise or customer relationships.
Or technological platforms, brand strength, anything that's unique to the acquirer. Priority themes are those areas where M&A is truly essential to deliver the company's overall strategy and, critically, where the company clearly has a demonstrated ability to add distinct value to targets.
So it's not just wishful thinking.
No, it's based on real capabilities. These themes are highly detailed, their impact is measurable, maybe in market share gains, or new customer segments reached, or specific product development goals. They provide a clear, actionable roadmap.
A roadmap for decisions and resources.
Right. They're not just about finding targets, they're about defining the strategic reason why a target matters specifically to your business.
Let's make this concrete. You mentioned an example earlier, maybe a global retail company.
Ah, yes. Good example. Imagine this global retailer. Their initial strategic goal was ambitious. Become the third largest player in their sector within 5 years.
Okay, big goal.
Big goal. And they determined it would require aggressive entry into several key emerging markets. Now, a less disciplined company, like we discussed.
Might have just started scanning globally for any retail target in any emerging market.
Exactly. Cast a super wide net, hope for the best. But this company did something much smarter, much more strategic. They didn't just have a vague goal. They refined their M&A theme with incredible precision.
Oh.
Well, instead of trying to spread themselves too thin across dozens of potential markets, the managers realized that entering too many markets at once just wasn't practical.
Why not? Resource constraints, complexity.
All of the above. Constraints on management time, the sheer complexities of local regulations, supply chain differences, geographical challenges of integrating diverse new operations. It was too much.
Makes sense. So they focused.
They smartly limited their search to just the two most promising regions. Regions where their existing capabilities had the highest chance of success. And even then, they didn't just look for any company.
They got even more specific.
Much more specific. They decided they would only acquire local companies that were, get this, currently unprofitable.
Unprofitable. That sounds risky.
Yet were already firmly established in the top 3 of their respective local markets.
Okay, unprofitable, but top 3 market share. That is a specific filter. What was the logic there?
It wasn't arbitrary at all. There was a very precise, data-driven rationale. They knew their own highly efficient lean operations and their superior global supply chain could offer truly significant cost synergies.
Ah, so they could turn around the unprofitable operations.
Exactly. Especially in targets that likely had bloated or inefficient operations. This was crucial given how important economies of scale are in retail where margins can be razor thin.
Right.
And they also recognized something else vital. Local branding, a deep understanding of local consumer preferences, and the ability to cater to local tastes were absolutely critical for success in these specific emerging markets.
And so they needed the local knowledge from the target.
Precisely. They knew they could provide the operational backbone, the capital, the global purchasing power, while the target provided that invaluable local market understanding, the established brand recognition, the customer loyalty. It was a strategic fit.
Combination of strengths.
A perfect combination. This super precise, well-defined M&A theme allowed them to narrow their list of potential candidates from maybe hundreds down to just a handful.
Making the search way more focused and efficient.
Incredibly focused. It meant their M&A team wasn't wasting cycles on targets that didn't fit their specific value creation hypothesis.
Yeah.
And the outcome, it speaks for itself.
They succeeded.
Well ahead of their 5-year schedule, this company successfully completed the necessary acquisitions in those targeted emerging markets and nearly achieved their ambitious revenue goals. They solidified their position as a top-tier player.
Wow. That really shows the power of focus, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The power of a clear strategic hypothesis and of truly understanding your unique capabilities as the best owner. It's not just about what you buy, but why you are the best one to own it.
That's a fantastic illustration. Okay, let's move on then to our second capability, managing your reputation as an acquirer. Now, this is an area I think many companies completely overlook, often to their own detriment.
Yeah, it's often seen as a soft factor, but it has hard consequences.
Totally. They simply don't consider how potential targets in the wider market actually view them, or how their value proposition as a buyer stacks up against competitors.
It's not just about the price tag you offer.
Not at all. It's profoundly about perception, trust, and how you're seen within that whole industry ecosystem.
Mm.
The problems that come from neglecting this are pretty significant, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. You see companies that are maybe too slow, too reactive in identifying targets. They wait for bankers to bring them deals rather than proactively building relationships.
Or they're too timid when they do approach.
Too tactical.
Yeah, too tactical, too transactional in those initial conversations,
Mm-hmm.
focusing only on the deal mechanics, the price, the terms, instead of painting that compelling strategic vision.
And those broad, undefined goals we just talked about, they don't help here either, do they?
Not at all. They prevent companies from proactively approaching a curated list of potential targets with a really strong story. And the consequence,
They become reliant on outside sources, investment banks.
overly dependent, which can lead to constant fire drills, a reactive scramble when something comes on the market, rather than a truly strategic, proactive approach.
And they can get a bad rap. Unfortunately, yes. In many cases, they earn a reputation among potential targets, especially founders and entrepreneurs, as being maybe opportunistic, process-heavy, bureaucratic, laden with overhead.
Not exactly the qualities that attract the best companies,
Yeah.
particularly the ones that aren't even actively trying to sell.
Precisely. You've hit on a crucial point there. In our observations, companies that purposefully invest in cultivating a strong reputation as an acquirer, they're perceived in a completely different light.
How so was the difference?
They're seen as bold, maybe focused on collaboration, genuinely able to provide real mentorship and bring distinctive capabilities to the table for the companies they acquire.
So more of a partner than just a buyer.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that even very large, complex organizations, the ones you might think would be intimidating for smaller, nimble targets, can actually be seen as highly attractive buyers.
How do they manage that?
It's largely down to the intentional way they present themselves, how they engage with the market long before a deal is even being discussed, and how they manage their M&A interactions.
So what do these companies do well specifically?
Well, first, they tend to lead with deep, actionable industry insight, not just spreadsheets and financial projections.
So a business case focused on winning together.
Right. Focused on winning in the marketplace by combining forces, not merely on abstract synergies or the deal value itself. They clearly demonstrate to the target's managers how they would fit into a broader, compelling strategic picture. They showcase career paths, growth opportunities.
Makes the future less scary for the target team.
Definitely. Furthermore, they usually have highly scalable functions and, critically, a predictable, transparent M&A process.
Predictable and transparent. That must reduce anxiety.
Hugely. It helps targets navigate what's inherently a stressful period. And finally, they're incredibly purposeful in how they present themselves. They equip their executives with consistent, compelling materials, talking points.
That showcase the organization's best attributes. Its culture, its vision.
Exactly. They're managing their acquirer brand intentionally.
And the outcome of all this intentional reputation building, it must be pretty powerful.
It's profoundly powerful. It enables these acquirers to succeed on dimensions way beyond just offering the highest price. And crucially, as you hinted, they're often approached by targets that aren't even officially for sale yet.
Wow. The best assets come knocking on their door.
Think about that. The best assets, the most innovative startups, the most promising private companies, they naturally migrate towards the acquirers they perceive will add the most value to their enterprise. That is a massive competitive advantage.
Because if the best targets are coming to you,
It significantly reduces your search time. It lowers the complexity of integration because there's already a foundation of trust and shared vision.
and it cuts down the risk of those costly bidding wars.
Drastically decreases it. It creates this virtuous cycle of attracting high-quality assets deal after deal.
And it's not just about, showing up at industry conferences or chatting with VCs, right? It's more structured than that.
Oh, much more. Building this reputation involves a highly structured and proactive approach to relationships across the entire industry ecosystem.
The whole ecosystem, what does that mean?
It requires understanding precisely how many relationships you need, of what kind, with which specific partners could be customers, suppliers, industry analysts, maybe even academic institutions.
Partners who possess specific attributes or insights.
Exactly. It's about building reputation within the entire ecosystem around potential targets, not just schmoozing the targets themselves. It's about being consistently visible, consistently adding value in the broader industry conversation, demonstrating your long-term commitment to a particular strategic space.
Being seen as a thought leader, almost.
In a way, yes. A thoughtful, committed player. We saw a great example with a high-tech company. They deliberately centered their M&A reputation around the theme of enabling innovation.
Okay, enabling innovation. How did they execute that?
Well, their investment in this reputation started with a thoughtful, multi-channel external marketing campaign, sure. But it quickly permeated their entire M&A process and even their internal culture.
So it wasn't just superficial marketing.
Not at all. For instance, in discussions at industry conferences, within engineering communities, through their investor relations, their managers weren't just pitching deals, they were actively using testimonials from employees of companies they'd already acquired.
Social proof.
Powerful social proof, coupled with good old-fashioned jawboning, persuasive, direct, informal conversation to really underscore their proven track record.
What track record were they highlighting?
How they consistently bought companies and then provided them with the expertise, the capital, the resources needed to truly accelerate their product pipelines, often faster than those companies could have possibly done on their own.
So proving they actually added value post-acquisition.
Exactly. They also proactively developed meaningful personal relationships with target executives, often discussing potential collaborations, ways to work together, even completely outside the immediate context of a deal.
Building trust before a transaction is even mentioned.
Right. Building genuine rapport, trust, a sense of shared vision for the future. And maybe most importantly, when it came time to actually present integration plans and future investment models to potential targets,
They had to be consistent with the reputation.
absolutely. Managers consistently ensured those plans were always in lockstep with the company's reputation for enabling innovation. This unwavering consistency reinforced trust. It showed their actions matched their words. They walk the talk.
It makes the reputation real, not just a slogan.
Exactly. It's about making your reputation a living, breathing part of your M&A strategy.
That brings us really nicely to our third capability. Confirming the strategic vision. This sounds like a critical stage, maybe a breaking point for many companies.
It often is. A point where that vital link between the grand strategic idea behind the deal and the actual transaction, well, it often snaps.
And this typically happens, somewhat surprisingly, during due diligence.
Right in the middle of due diligence, yeah. The core problem here is that traditional due diligence, while absolutely essential, focuses very strictly on, the usual suspects.
Right.
Financial, legal, tax, operational issues.
The standard checklist stuff, gotta do it.
Absolutely non-negotiable checks. But this conventional approach often fails to incorporate the deeper data, the more nuanced insights you need to truly test whether the underlying strategic vision for the deal is actually valid.
So you're verifying the past performance, the existing liability.
Meticulously. But you're not rigorously challenging the future assumptions, the assumptions upon which the entire deal premise rests.
You're auditing what is, but not really probing what could be, or maybe more importantly, what won't be if your strategic assumptions are off base.
That's it, exactly. And that's precisely where the solution comes in. Companies need to bolster their standard financial due diligence with what we call strategic due diligence.
Okay, strategic due diligence, what's its main purpose?
Its primary purpose is to rigorously test that conceptual rationale for the deal against the more detailed, often more qualitative information that usually becomes available after a letter of intent or LOI gets signed.
Right. The LOI opens the door to more data.
Exactly. An LOI, just for listeners who might not know, is basically a non-binding agreement outlining the deal terms before you get to the final legally binding contracts. So once that LOI is in place, more confidential, more granular data becomes accessible. That allows for a much deeper dive.
And strategic DD uses that access.
Yes. And it also explicitly involves verifying if that ambitious vision of the future operating model, the whole reason you're doing the deal in the first place, is truly achievable and actually grounded in reality.
Not just a nice story in a PowerPoint deck.
Definitely not. A key focus of strategic diligence is to explicitly confirm the specific assets, the capabilities, the relationships that genuinely make the buyer the best owner of that specific target company.
Back to the best owner idea. So strategic DD helps prove that.
It's designed to bolster the executive team's confidence that they are truly an advantaged buyer of that asset, meaning they possess unique levers to create disproportionate value from it.
What defines an advantaged buyer in this context? What levers are we talking about?
Well, advantage buyers excel at applying their unique institutional skills. Maybe it's operational excellence or sophisticated marketing and sales strategies, advanced product development methods.
Or even better, HR and management practices.
Exactly. Applying those skills to significantly improve the target's performance. They also leverage their privileged assets or proprietary knowledge.
Like a strong brand,
Yeah.
unique IP, better financing.
Or deep proprietary industry insights. Yes. And critically, they often utilize their unique relationships, maybe with key customers, suppliers, regulators, the broader community, to improve the target's performance in ways others couldn't, generating synergies that often go way beyond the traditional simple scale synergies.
So it's about uncovering that unique value you bring.
Precisely. And this assessment, this strategic diligence, it demands absolute honesty, relentless thoroughness. It is not a checkbox exercise where you just confirm what you already believe or hope is true.
Got to challenge your own assumptions.
Vigorously. The process requires executives to develop a truly fact-based point of view on their fundamental beliefs about the deal's strategic rationale. And then they must rigorously test those beliefs with everyone who will actually be responsible for delivering the value from the deal.
People on the ground.
The people on the ground who have to make it work. This means bringing in the salespeople who intimately understand the customer dynamics and the competitive threats. The R&D engineers who can assess product roadmaps and technical feasibility.
HR folks who get the culture integration challenges. Finance teams for realistic projections.
Exactly. Human resources personnel who grasp the complexities of integrating diverse talent and cultures, and finance departments who can build realistic, ground-up financial projections, not just top-down guesses. This multifunctional, candid dialogue is crucial.
Why? To get a holistic view.
It ensures a holistic, multifaceted, and ultimately realistic view of the deal's true potential and its significant pitfalls. It prevents crucial information and critical counter-perspectives from getting siloed or ignored, which can be absolutely devastating later on.
You mentioned a cautionary tale earlier that illustrates this.
Yes, it's quite vivid. Consider a large financial services company. They acquired an asset a couple of years back with the strategic goal of expanding services to regional clients. Perfectly reasonable goal.
Okay.
Their due diligence for this deal, like many, focused almost solely on auditing the existing operations, reviewing past financials, legal docs, current operational processes, the standard stuff.
But they didn't test the future plans.
They did not conduct any deep testing of the viability of their proposed future operating models, how they actually plan to integrate and grow this acquired business.
What was their core assumption?
The company assumed its advantage lay in being one of the most effective operators in the financial industry, supported by their really robust, scalable IT systems and processes. A core strength, they believed.
Okay, confident assumption.
Very confident. Based on this, the executives proceeded with the deal. What they didn't realize, and critically only discovered after the deal had closed and integration efforts were underway, was that their own IT team, at a more operational level, had a completely different picture of the eventual end state. They knew something the deal team didn't.
What was it?
The two companies' IT systems, it turned out, simply could not be integrated as envisioned without massive, unforeseen costs and huge delays. They were fundamentally incompatible in key areas.
Wow, that's a major miss.
Yeah. Major. This fundamental IT incompatibility led to a significant, devastating failure in their strategic vision for the acquisition. It completely undermined the very foundation of their assumed competitive advantage.
Billions down the drain, potentially. Reputation hit.
Absolutely. It's a powerful reminder. If you don't validate your strategic assumptions through candid, cross-functional strategic due diligence, even the most well-intentioned deal backed by a seemingly strong rationale can just crumble.
That is a stark reminder. You absolutely have to drill down into those strategic assumptions and involve everyone who understands the practicalities. And that brings us neatly to our fourth and final capability, which you said is often the most common pitfall, reassessing synergy targets throughout the M&A lifecycle.
Yeah, this one trips up a lot of companies. It seems straightforward, but the execution is often flawed.
So what's the pervasive problem here? How does it usually go wrong?
Well, companies that treat M&A as that one-off discrete project we talked about, they typically build and approve the company's valuation, including all its projected synergies, only once.
During the initial due diligence phase.
Exactly, during that hectic due diligence phase. And then these targets get rigidly locked into operating budgets, like they're set in stone, a decree from on high, often without any real mechanism or willingness to adjust them later.
And this leads to problems during integration.
It often leads to either an overly rigid integration approach, trying to force reality to fit the initial spreadsheet, ignoring unique opportunities or challenges that emerge.
Or the opposite, complete chaos.
Or conversely, a completely unstructured approach where maybe integration relies on the arbitrary decisions of a single stakeholder, leading to confusion and missed targets. The unfortunate consequence is there's rarely a structured opportunity to actually revisit these value creation targets with executives, board members, other key stakeholders once the deal is approved. And, crucially, new information starts surfacing during integration.
Which it always does.
Always. So this freezes expectations at a time of inherent uncertainty. Because remember, the information gathered during initial due diligence is, by its very nature, intentionally imperfect.
Right. Due to the negotiation context, time pressure.
Exactly. And our detailed estimates show this leads to companies either over or undervaluing the true potential synergies more than 40% of the time. That's a huge margin of error.
Wow, 40%. Why does this happen so often? You mentioned imperfect information.
Yeah, financial due diligence, by its design, is conducted with intentionally imperfect information, especially during intense negotiations. Each side is trying to get favorable terms, often quickly. The focus is typically on likely value, which is appropriate for managing the risk of overpaying, right?
Makes sense. Risk management first.
But it's not focused on potential value, which is what an operator, someone running the business post-deal, would focus on to maximize the combined entity's true capabilities. It's fundamentally a risk management exercise during DD, not an operational optimization one.
And that crucial distinction often gets lost after the deal closes.
Yeah.
Everyone just remembers the number from the DB model.
Precisely. The number gets locked in, and the context that it was a conservative estimate based on limited data gets forgotten.
So what's the solution? How do companies avoid this trap?
The solution lies in building a real dynamic capability at managing synergies throughout the entire M&A process. Adapting as new information inevitably comes to light. It requires a fundamental mindset shift.
A mindset shift, how?
Those due diligence synergy estimates. They should be viewed not as the ceiling, not as the maximum possible, but rather as the lowest acceptable performance, the floor, not the roof.
Okay. The minimum bar.
Exactly. The true goal should be to get managers to set their sights much higher, pushing beyond those initial, often conservative estimates to unlock the true upside potential. This requires a culture shift towards identifying opportunity, not just mitigating downside risk post-close.
Okay, so how do you do that tactically? How do you encourage that opportunity-seeking mindset?
Well, companies can employ several tactical activities. One incredibly effective approach is conducting value creation summits shortly after the deal closes.
Value creation summits, what are those?
These bring together all the relevant stakeholders, not just the original deal team, but key operational managers, R&D leaders, sales teams from both companies. They mimic the intensity and the focused effort of a due diligence exercise.
But with a different goal.
Exactly. The incentives are shifted firmly towards identifying upside potential. Instead of scrutinizing risk, everyone is incentivized to find new, creative ways to create more value than initially thought possible.
Interesting. What's another tactic?
Another powerful tactic we've seen experienced acquirers use is taking a blank sheet approach to synergy identification post-close.
A blank sheet. Starting fresh.
Pretty much. This fosters true creativity and avoids anchoring the entire exercise in that initial financial due diligence model, which, as we said, often leads to only incremental thinking about synergies. A blank sheet encourages a fresh, unconstrained look at the maximum potential that could be realized from combining the two entities.
So forgetting the old numbers for a bit and just brainstorming.
Exactly. What's truly possible here if we think bigger?
Do you have examples of companies doing this successfully?
Yeah.
Applying this dynamic approach?
Yes, absolutely. Consider a consumer packaged goods company, a CPG company. Post-acquisition, they held one of these value creation summits.
What happened?
They boosted their run rate synergies, the annualized value, once fully realized, by an astounding 75%.
75% increase. How?
Their managers recognized during the summit that the target company had a really sophisticated, data-driven approach to in-store promotions. And crucially, they realized this approach wasn't just good for the acquired business.
It could be applied to the acquirer's core business, too.
Exactly. It could significantly improve the acquiring company's own base business in ways they hadn't even considered during due diligence.
Right.
This shows the power of looking beyond just direct integration synergies to these wider, sometimes transformational business impacts.
Leveraging best practices practices across the whole combined company.
Cross-pollinating capabilities.
Yeah.
Another fantastic example comes from a pharmaceutical company, a really big one. They managed to raise their synergies by over 40% on a very large, complex transaction. That translated to hundreds of millions of dollars in additional value.
40% on a huge deal is massive. How did they pull that off?
By actively revisiting their initial estimates immediately after the deal closed, they conducted a series of these dynamic reevaluation sessions, these value creation workshops.
And they created the right environment.
Critically, yes. They intentionally created a risk-free environment for managers to generate new ideas, encouraging really out-of-the-box thinking. And importantly, they showed they were willing to completely discard initial assumptions if new data or insights warranted it.
Even if it meant admitting the early projections were too low.
Even if it meant admitting the early projections were conservative, yes. They weren't attached to the original number, they were attached to maximizing value. And the proof is in the pudding.
They captured those higher synergies.
A few years later, they had successfully captured those significantly higher synergies. It really demonstrates the profound long-term value of flexibility, of continuous reassessment, and that willingness to challenge initial, often limited, assumptions made under pressure.
So bring this all together then. We've covered these 4 capabilities.
Yeah.
Thematic M&A, reputation, strategic DD, dynamic synergies. It sounds incredibly powerful, but M&A is still complex, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's crucial to acknowledge that M&A is inherently complex, and it's certainly not the silver bullet for every single strategic goal.
So sometimes the answer is just don't do the deal.
Sometimes, yes. If a strategic objective can realistically be achieved internally, organically, with a sensible investment profile and within a desirable time frame, companies should absolutely pursue that organic path first.
Why? To avoid the costs and risks.
Exactly. It allows them to avoid the deal premium that almost always comes with buying another company. And of course, it avoids the inherent integration risks and complexities, which are always significant. Organic growth should really be the default option where it's feasible.
Makes sense.
Yep.
But for those situations where M&A is the right strategic lever.
Right. For those companies willing to lean into and proactively manage this complexity by intentionally building these 4 institutional capabilities we've discussed.
Thematic M&A, strong acquirer reputation, rigorous strategic due diligence, and dynamic synergy management.
For those companies, they unlock the full transformative potential for growth through acquisition. They move beyond that deal-by-deal gamble.
And step into a realm of more predictable, value-driven expansion, something that really sets them apart.
Exactly. And that's the ultimate reward, isn't it? It's how M&A truly transforms from being seen as this risky, often opportunistic, deal-by-deal gamble.
Into that repeatable, strategic engine for value creation we talked about at the start.
Precisely. It gives companies an enduring competitive advantage, one that is incredibly difficult for competitors to replicate because, as we said, it's embedded deeply in the systematic capabilities of the organization.
In its culture, its processes, its cumulative experience.
Right. Not just in getting lucky with opportunistic deal-making. It's about being consistently better at M&A than anyone else in your space, making it a genuine source of strategic differentiation over the long haul.
Wow. What a journey we've taken together today. We've really moved, I think, from that common perception of M&A as just this fraught, risky thing.
To a much more nuanced and frankly more powerful understanding.
Yeah, seeing it as a potential strategic superpower, capable of creating sustained competitive advantage and real long-term value when done right.
When those capabilities are built and honed.
Exactly. So as you, our listeners, go about your day, here's maybe a final thought to mull over. Considering everything we've discussed today, how might revisiting your own organization's past acquisitions, maybe looking at them again through the lens of these 4 capabilities?
Thematic focus, reputation, strategic validation, dynamic synergies.
How might doing that uncover untapped value, perhaps even years after the deal closed? Or, maybe thinking more broadly, how might thinking like an advantage buyer shape your next strategic conversation? Even if it's not directly about M&A, but about any major investment or partnership.
That's a great point. And beyond just M&A itself, consider how these underlying principles we discuss, that precise thematic focus, the proactive reputation building, the thorough strategic validation before committing fully, and that dynamic value reassessment after launching, how could those apply to any major strategic initiative within your own organization?
Right, the discipline applies more broadly.
It really does. It's about appreciating the depth and strategic power inherent in what many might just perceive as another financial transaction or another big project, and recognizing that these principles, this capability-building mindset, can truly elevate almost any significant business endeavor.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep digging for those insights.